Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into something a bit different. The weakest characters in Genshin Impact based on the game's lore. Now, we all know this world is packed with powerful gods, fearsome monsters, and epic vision wielders who can literally bend the elements to their will. But what about those ordinary folks? The ones who don't have flashy powers or divine status? Yeah, they're part of the playable cast too, and honestly, story-wise, they're usually not the strongest players on the board. But here's the funny part. Even though these characters might seem weak lore-wise, many of them pack a serious punch when you bring them into your team. It's like, don't judge a book by its story background. So in this video, we're gonna chat about some of the most grounded, human, and let's say normal characters in Teyvat who don't quite shine in the lore spotlight but can still hold their own in battle. Let's jump right in and see who makes this weakest based on lore list. I'm
Very small
moving
portion
on
of
to the
the
video.
audience
Before
is
we
subscribed
start,
to the
if you
channel.
enjoy these types of list
Please don't
videos,
forget to
don't
subscribe
forget to
if you
like
like
the
these
video
types
and
of videos.
subscribe. Enjoy watching.
Thanks.
Alright, let's talk about Hu Tao, the director of the Wangsheng funeral parlor and a pyro polearm user who many players swear by in Genshin Impact. Now, if you jump into the game, you'll probably think she's a total powerhouse, dealing crazy amounts of damage and sweeping through enemies like a fiery tornado. But here's the twist. When it comes to the actual lore, Hu Tao isn't really the strong fighter you might expect. In fact, she openly admits that she does not like fighting at all. Her real strength lies in her deep knowledge of death and the afterlife, which makes her a fascinating character beyond just damage numbers. Despite her fiery gameplay, Hu Tao's story doesn't really showcase any legendary feats of power or strength. She is more about guiding souls and maintaining the balance between life and death rather than smashing through hordes of enemies. So, if you were expecting her lore to back up the huge damage she dishes out in-game, you might be a little disappointed. She is one of those characters where gameplay and story really diverge, which is pretty cool because it adds layers to her personality. She's not just about brute force, but also about respect for the cycle of life. That said, there is always room for growth in any story, right? Who knows what the future holds for Hu Tao in the Genshin Impact universe? Maybe one day her lore will catch up to her gameplay strength, or we will see a side of her that's more powerful than what we've seen so far. But for now, when it comes to the lore, Hu Tao definitely ranks among the weaker characters in terms of raw power, even if she remains one of the most intriguing figures in the game. Let's dive into Baizhu, the enigmatic owner of Bubu Pharmacy in Liyue. He's not your typical adventurer swinging swords or blasting elemental powers left and right. Instead, Baizhu is a doctor with a deep connection to Changsheng, a mystical white snake that he has a life-draining contract with. This bond allows him to perform incredible healing and medicinal feats, saving countless lives. It's a heavy price though. His own life force is slowly consumed to keep others alive, which adds a really tragic layer to his character. Despite all his knowledge and medical skills, Baizhu's physical strength is practically non-existent. In a world where elemental powers and combat prowess often define a character's impact, Baizhu stands out as someone who's pretty vulnerable in the raw power department. His focus is on healing and survival, not fighting, which means he's definitely one of the weakest characters if we judge by physical ability or combat strength. He's more of a support figure, but even then, his presence in the battlefield, lore-wise, is pretty minimal. What really makes Baizhu interesting is his quest to become the final host of Changsheng, aiming to break the endless cycle of death that his contract enforces. It's a noble and ambitious goal, seeking immortality not for power or glory, but to protect others. Until he manages that though, Baizhu remains one of the weaker figures in Genshin Impact's lore, despite his vital role as a healer. So, while he might not be the strongest in a fight, his story adds a unique and somber flavor to the world of Teyvat. Let's talk about Layla, the sleep-deprived Ur-Tawahist student from Sumeru Academia. She's not your average scholar, she's deep into theoretical astrology, which sounds pretty intense. But here's the catch. Layla is chronically sleep-deprived, like really tired all the time. It's not just because she studies hard, she actually has an alternate persona that takes over when she's sleepwalking. And get this sleepwalking version of her somehow manages to get all her work done efficiently, like a secret productivity hack straight out of a fantasy novel. Now, this sleepwalking persona is definitely the cool part of her story. It hints at a hidden power or potential lurking beneath her exhausted exterior. In terms of lore strength, that alternate self could become something really interesting down the line, but as of now, Layla doesn't have any major feats or legendary moments that make her stand out in Genshin Impact's vast cast. She's more of a sleeper hit, pun intended, than a powerhouse right now. So yeah, when we rank characters based purely on lore strength, Layla lands pretty low on the list. She's definitely one of the weaker ones, but honestly, that makes her story all the more relatable. Not everyone in Teyvat is a god or a warrior, some are just juggling life and sleep while trying to figure things out. Maybe we'll see that sleepy genius side of Layla step up in future updates, but for now, she's chill, quiet, and definitely in the underdog category. Let's chat about Barbara, the beloved deaconess of the Church of Favonius and arguably Mondstadt's biggest idol. If you've played Genshin Impact, you know she's everyone's go-to healer, and honestly, her bubbly personality and kindness have won over tons of fans. But here's the thing, when you dig into her lore, Barbara isn't exactly the fierce warrior you might imagine from her Hydro Vision and Catalyst weapon. She's really more about caring for others and spreading positivity than throwing down in battle. In fact, Barbara herself admits she wouldn't stand a chance against a bunch of treasure hoarders if it came to a real fight. That says a lot, right? Despite having a vision, which grants elemental powers in this world, she lacks actual combat training and experience. Her skills are centered around healing and supporting, not fighting. So when it comes to raw power or combat prowess in the story, Barbara doesn't make much of a splash. She's far from being a frontline hero. That's why Barbara ranks pretty low on the list when we talk about the weakest characters in Genshin Impact's lore. She's a gentle soul who wants to help people but doesn't have the strength or skills to back it up in a fight. And honestly, that's part of her charm. She's not about bashing enemies, she's about keeping her friends safe and healthy. So while she might not be a legend in terms of strength, Barbara definitely holds a special place in the hearts of many players. Let's talk about Dori, the flashy lord of Sanjamar Bay and one of Sumeru's most notorious merchants. She's famous for charging sky-high prices on her goods and runs the palace of Alcar Zarzare, which sounds super fancy, but what really stands out about Dori is her obsession with Mora, the currency in Teyvat. She's so hooked on Mora that she's willing to dive into the black market and use some pretty shady tactics just to get richer. So yeah, when it comes to money and business, Dori is definitely a powerhouse. However, if we're talking about actual strength and power in the lore, Dori doesn't really measure up. Despite wielding a claymore, she's not the one swinging it around in battle. That job is done by her Jinni, so physically and magically, she's not packing much punch. Unlike many other characters who have impressive elemental powers or combat skills, Dori's main power is her economic influence, which doesn't translate into raw fighting strength. That's why, if you take Mora out of the equation, Dori is easily one of the weakest characters in Genshin Impact lore. She's got all the riches and connections, but when it comes down to sheer combat ability or elemental mastery, she's pretty much relying on others to do the heavy lifting. So, in terms of strength, Dori is more about brains and business than brawn and magic. Let's chat about Nilou, the graceful dancer from the Zubair Theatre and one of Sumeru's shining stars. If you followed the Sumeru story arc in Genshin Impact, you've probably seen Nilou get plenty of screen time. Her elegance and charm definitely make her stand out. But here's the thing, while she shines on stage and in gameplay with her fluid Hydro Sword moves, her actual strength in the lore doesn't quite live up to the hype. Nilou is physically fit and capable of handling regular enemies, but when it comes to real feats of power or legendary moments in the story, she doesn't really have any. Unlike some characters who show world-shaking abilities or deep-rooted powers, Nilou comes off as a pretty ordinary vision bearer. She's more of a skilled performer than a fierce fighter, which is a bit of a letdown if you were expecting her to be a major powerhouse. So, if we're ranking characters based on lore strength, Nilou lands on the weaker side of the list. She's definitely not someone who's changing the course of history or dominating battles in the story. Instead, she adds flavor and culture to the world, bringing artistry and grace rather than raw power. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes, not every character needs to be a legend to be interesting. Let's talk about Charlotte, the sharp-eyed journalist working for the Steambird in Fontaine. If you know her from the game, you probably appreciate her as a solid cryo support, help your team chill out enemies and keep things cool in battle. But when it comes to the story and lore, Charlotte is much more grounded. She's really just an ordinary vision bearer without any flashy powers or epic feats to her name. Charlotte's real strength lies in her role as a reporter. She's got a knack for spotting trends and hunting down the juiciest scoops to share with the public. She's all about uncovering the truth and keeping everyone informed, which makes her super important in the day-to-day life of Fontaine. But beyond her journalistic talents, she doesn't have any big magical or combat abilities that set her apart in the world of Genshin Impact. So, if we're ranking characters based on their raw strength and impact in the lore, Charlotte definitely falls on the weaker side. She's not out there saving the world or unleashing powerful elemental bursts in the story. Instead, she adds a slice of normal life and realism to the game's vast universe, showing us that not everyone with a vision is a hero or a warrior. Some are just doing their best to keep the news rolling. Let's dive into Kaveh, the talented architect behind the magnificent palace of Alcazar. This guy is basically a genius when it comes to design and construction, and his work definitely leaves a mark on Sumeru's landscape. But here's the catch. Even though Kaveh created this incredible masterpiece, the project left him bankrupt, which is why he's now sharing a place with Al-Haytham. So yeah, being a brilliant architect doesn't always pay the bills. When it comes to raw power and combat skills, Kaveh just doesn't stack up against many others in Sumeru. For example, he was easily outpaced by Faruzan in something as simple as running, which kind of says it all. Even though he can wield his trusty case, Mirak, as a weapon in the game, in the lore he doesn't have any special powers or training that make him a real fighter. His strengths lie firmly in his mind and creativity, not in battle. So, if we're ranking characters based on their lore strength, Kaveh lands pretty low on the list. He's undeniably brilliant and important for his architectural contributions. But when it comes to fighting or wielding unique powers, he's far from the heavy hitters of Genshin Impact. Kaveh reminds us that not every character needs to be a warrior. Some are heroes in their own way, through talent and hard work, even if they don't pack a punch. Let's talk about Furina, a character with one of the most complicated and emotional stories in Genshin Impact. She was the Hydro Archon for 500 years, carrying the heavy burden of making sure Focalor's grand plan unfolded as intended. That's a lot of pressure for anyone. After the Archon quest in Fontaine wrapped up, she stepped down from her divine role and became a normal person again. It's pretty rare to see a former god just trying to live a regular life, and it adds a lot of depth to her character. Right now, Furina is still pretty new to wielding her vision and doesn't have any real combat training. She's a pacifist at heart and avoids fighting whenever possible. So if you're looking at raw strength and battle prowess in the lore, she definitely falls into the weaker category at the moment. Despite her past as an Archon, she hasn't shown any major feats of power recently, which might surprise some players given her status. But here's the interesting part. Furina's vision is linked to some mysterious forces like Pneuma and Orsia, and she clearly has a strong connection to the Hydro element. This hints that her story is far from over and she could grow into a much more powerful figure soon. So while she's one of the weaker characters in the lore for now, Furina's potential is huge, and I wouldn't be shocked if we see her strength really shine in future updates. Let's talk about Xinyan, Liyue's very own rock and roll musician who's got a pyro vision and swings a big claymore. She's definitely got style and attitude, but when it comes to the lore, she's probably one of the weakest characters in Genshin Impact. Unlike some vision bearers who have epic backstories or legendary feats, Xinyan's story focuses mostly on her passion for music rather than her fighting skills or elemental power. In fact, there's really not much about Xinyan in the main narrative. Most of what we know about her comes from her love of rock and roll and how she wants to shake up Liyue's music scene. There's no solid evidence in the lore that she's a powerful fighter or has a deep connection to her pyro element. She's just a regular civilian who happens to have a vision, which puts her way behind many other characters when it comes to raw strength or influence. So if you're ranking characters by their lore strength, Xinyan definitely lands near the bottom. She's charming and fun, but she's not the kind of character who's changing the course of history or unleashing earth-shattering powers. Instead, she adds some cool flavor to the world of Teyvat, reminding us that not everyone with a vision is a battle-hardened hero. Some just want to rock out and enjoy life. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.